Professor Wen Guanzhong on the Institutional Roots of the U.S.-China Trade War, Part 2. Professor Wen repeatedly emphasizes that over the past years, China has not continued with factor market reform, meaning letting the market allocate resources instead of the party. He especially brings up the third plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee. Back then, there were still reform-minded officials inside the system pushing for the decisive role of the market. But that approach has since diverged completely from Xi Jinping's direction. Why? Because once the market allocates resources, the party loses control. Land can't be arbitrarily seized. Capital can't be subsidized as the party wishes. The household registration system can't be used to lock rural residents out. If the party can't command everything, it simply won't accept reform. In Wen's view, China's political system is suppressing the next stage of economic reform. And without real factor markets, without fair pricing, without rule of law, how can a country integrate into a free trade system? That's why he believes the U.S. shouldn't apply reciprocal tariff policies equally to every country. For market economies like the EU, Japan, or Canada, zero tariffs are fine. But for a structurally distorted system like China's, there needs to be additional tariffs and special scrutiny because the prices themselves are fake, manipulated by the state. He says this isn't protectionism. It's what he calls institutional correction. You can't let a country with artificially low costs dominate global manufacturing, then use that income to reinforce its authoritarian system, to oppress its own people, silence dissent, and export that model elsewhere. That's not a fair game. Will the U.S. pay a price for this approach? Wen admits, yes, the whole world's supply chains are tied up with China. Changing them will be painful. Business costs will rise. Markets will shake. But he says it's worth it. America is now at the edge. It can't keep borrowing endlessly. It can't keep running trade deficits. If it continues down this path, trust in the dollar could collapse. Economic hollowing will worsen. You can't keep printing money to cover deficits. Eventually, something will break. And he puts it bluntly, this is not just a trade conflict. It's structural confrontation between two systems. Let's continue now with Professor Wen's view on the internal logic of the Trump administration, the voter base in the Rust Belt, the decline of the middle class, and how he sees the future direction of U.S.-China relations. When talking about Trump's policy logic, Wen offers a fascinating observation. Trump, he says, isn't a true isolationist. His slogan was America First, sure, but if you look closer, he supported zero tariffs, freedom of navigation, and maintaining global order. Even the Red Sea and South China Sea, he sent troops to stabilize things. So no, he wasn't trying to shut America off from the world. He was trying to build a selective globalization. Only work with countries that share similar rules. Professor Wen points out that the U.S. economy is actually doing okay. Employment is stable, inflation is under control, and while the stock market is volatile, it reflects uncertainty, not collapse. So why is Trump still so popular? The answer, Wen says, lies in the Rust Belt, traditional manufacturing workers, and their families who were left behind by globalization. And he gets emotional about this. These people didn't fail because they were lazy. They became globalization's collateral damage. They had decent jobs in auto plants and steel mills. Then overnight, the factories closed, jobs were gone, and families started falling apart. Divorce, addiction, suicide, crime, real issues that liberal media rarely talk about. Trump was the first president to bring these problems into the spotlight. He said, I'll bring your jobs back. I'll rebuild manufacturing. I'll make America great again. And that message deeply resonated with Rust Belt voters. So, Wen says whether or not you like Trump, he recognized a long-ignored structural issue, the cost of adjusting to globalization. For decades, U.S. liberal administrations have praised the benefits of globalization, but they ignored the price, especially for people who couldn't transition to new sectors. You can't just let people lose jobs and expect them to figure it out on their own. Nor can you patch over it with welfare checks. Trump's approach is a structural reset, a political reordering of the global industrial chain. But can this really bring manufacturing back? Wen says, don't be too idealistic. You can't just want manufacturing and make it happen. It depends on cost, market, tech, labor. The U.S. can never return to the 1950s golden era of mass manufacturing, but can focus on high-end sectors, automation, smart factories, biotech, green energy, areas where America has an edge. The key question is, who makes the decision? The market or the president? Wen strongly warns against going down the road of planned economy. You can't have the president pick a favorite industry and then pour money into it. That's no different from China's state-run model. Industrial policy must follow market logic. Even if you want to restructure, it has to be through incentives and reform, not administrative command. He says China operates under a national mobilization system. If the government says go, the resources flood in, even if it's a money-losing venture. That might produce a few flashy results short-term, but it's unsustainable in terms of efficiency and innovation. America's strength lies in civil innovation, rule of law, and free competition. If it sacrifices those in the name of manufacturing revival, it risks losing what makes its system work. And then Wen delivers a heavy conclusion. This isn't a fight between two countries, it's a clash between two systems. We can't let a regime that oppresses its people and exports authoritarianism keep expanding its influence. The free world has to regroup. We can't treat all nations the same anymore. That's why he supports tiered treatment, zero tariffs, and free flow from market economies. But for non-market ones, you need extra tariffs, non-tariff barriers, and scrutiny across finance, tech, and culture. He says China's system is built on distorted pricing, non-market resource allocation, a closed internet, heavy censorship, media control, and unpredictable legal enforcement. Letting such a country freely access global markets isn't just unfair. It risks undermining the very order of the free world. So he says, this isn't a new Cold War. It's a competition of systems and values. And we're standing at a crossroads. Either we retreat or we hold our ground. Next, let's hear Professor Wen's reflections on the middle class, blind spots in global public opinion, and his personal thoughts on whether reform is still possible in China. In the final part of the interview, Professor Wen Guanzhong also shared his reflections on the future of the middle class and the risks it faces. He said that whether in China or in the United States, it's usually this silent middle, the middle class, that truly upholds social stability and enables freedom to flourish. These people have decent incomes, useful skills, and a basic belief in freedom, education, and the rule of law. But they don't necessarily control the media or have access to power. If the middle class gets hurt in institutional struggles, ignored in globalization, or sacrificed in national strategies, then society as a whole starts to fracture. Professor Wen said this is also true in China. China's middle class used to be a beneficiary of globalization, a symbol of the dividends of reform. But in recent years, many feel like their path upward has been blocked. Education is overly competitive, housing is hard to afford, social benefits are shrinking, taxes are rising, and entrepreneurship is getting harder. If these systemic issues aren't addressed, the middle class will only grow more anxious and more silent. What's even more worrying, he said, is that when the system becomes more centralized, more closed, and increasingly demands ideological loyalty, the middle class becomes the easiest group to suppress and the least able to resist. They have homes, children, mortgages, jobs. They can't afford the cost of saying no. Professor Wen said with some emotion, if a country allows its middle class to go silent, then that country is not far from decline. So is there still hope for systemic reform in China? Wen's answer: we must preserve hope, but not indulge in fantasy. He recalled that after the third plenum of the 18th Party Congress, China actually laid out a fairly clear roadmap for reform, from developing factor markets and reforming the land system to reducing state-owned enterprise privileges and opening up market access. At that time, many reformers within the system were still actively pushing for change. But in the years that followed, those reforms were gradually rolled back. Private companies were suppressed, land policies became rigid, and the trend of state advance and private retreat accelerated. The whole direction of the system became more conservative, more centralized. When said bluntly, a system without an exit mechanism cannot become a true market economy. You can't ask people to voluntarily enter the system, but deny them the freedom to leave. You can't just emphasize discipline and rules while denying people the right to choose and compete. This isn't just a matter of policy inconsistency. It's a fundamental shift in the logic of the system. So what should the free world do? One is clear: this is not about containing China, and it's not a Cold War mentality. What the free world needs to do is remain open, but with conditions. It must build a global network of allies based on shared values and institutional consensus. He said we can't keep dreaming that every country will naturally evolve into a market economy or democracy. History shows us that not all countries are willing to give up authoritarian control, and not all leaders respect liberty. That's why, he said, openness must have conditions. Globalization must have boundaries. This circle of friends shouldn't be based on geography or culture, but on rules. If you believe in market economics, rule of law, human rights, freedom of information, and protection of property, then you're welcome. If not, you can still do business, but you won't get a seat at the decision-making table. One believes that under such a new structure, China will eventually undergo another round of reflection and adjustment. He said, institutions have inertia, but they can be jolted awake by reality. When social tensions pile up, when young people feel hopeless, when the costs of restructured globalization become too heavy, someone inside the Chinese system will ask again, which path are we really on? And finally, one said something that left a deep impression on me. Institutions aren't eternal. Rules can be negotiated, but human nature doesn't change. Freedom, dignity, fairness, these will always be the core needs of human society. He hopes that whether it's China or the United States or this complicated and divided world, we can all remember this fundamental truth. That concludes Professor Wen Guanzhong's powerful and deeply insightful breakdown of the institutional roots behind the U.S.-China trade conflict. He wasn't just talking about tariffs. He wasn't just critiquing a policy. He was helping us see the deeper structural tension, a long-term standoff between two systems and two sets of rules. He's helped us understand this isn't just about trade. It's not just about technology. It's not even just about cultural exchange. It's about the system. It's a big topic and a complicated one. But I hope this episode gave you a fresh perspective and something to think about. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time.